Hey everyone, and welcome back. We're going to be diving into something pretty fascinating today.
Yeah.
That's the connection between all of our clean technologies and the sometimes not so clean race for the materials that those technologies depend on.
Right.
I mean, think about it. Everything from our electric cars to our solar panels to even our smartphones, all of that really shiny tech relies on metals, and those metals have a story
Yeah,
that's way more complicated than you might think.
it really is. And it's really interesting because the stuff we think of as, the technology of the future, the stuff that's going to kind of save us from climate change,
Right.
like electric car batteries and the huge blades for wind turbines and all that stuff,
hmm
it actually depends on some of the most environmentally and ethically challenging industries you can imagine.
Yeah, it's like a total contradiction.
It is.
And to kind of untangle this whole thing, we're looking at Vince Beiser's new book, which is called Power Metal: The Race for the Resources That Will Shape the Future. And it's coming out soon, but we got an early copy. And this book takes us on a journey literally to places like the ocean floor and these massive e-waste dumps in Nigeria,
Yeah.
just to show you how complicated this system is.
Well, and the book lays it out really well, just the central problem that we're facing, which is that we have this skyrocketing demand for metals like lithium and cobalt and copper.
You know the stuff you hear about all the time.
Exactly, the stuff that's in everything.
Right.
But the processes for getting those metals are super damaging, and not just to the environment, but to the people who are involved
Yeah.
in getting those metals out of the ground.
Yeah, it's almost like a hidden cost of all of our progress.
Yeah, that we don't see.
I mean, we love our gadgets, we want them to be green and clean, but we don't think about how they get made.
Right.
And this book really makes you think about that.
Yeah.
One of the craziest things I read about was this Australian multimillionaire who is planning to start mining the ocean floor.
I know, isn't that wild?
Can you talk a little bit about that? What's the deal with that?
Well, the ocean floor is this, like, potentially massive source of all these minerals that we need for batteries and all this other tech. But it's also like this totally pristine ecosystem.
Mm-hmm.
We're talking about potentially destroying habitats that have been evolving for millions of years with all these creatures we don't even understand yet.
So it's like we're trying to solve one problem, but we might be creating a whole other set of problems.
Exactly. It's this classic case of unintended consequences.
What made me think about, like, who regulates that? Who's in charge of the ocean floor?
Right.
It's like the Wild West down there.
Yeah. International waters are like notoriously difficult to govern.
Mm-hmm.
So who gets to decide, what's allowed and what's sustainable and who profits? It's a huge question.
And it seems like something we should be talking about now before this whole thing blows up.
Yeah, absolutely.
But it's not just the environmental impact.
Mhm.
Beiser also talks about the human cost of all of this. And there's this really powerful section where he takes us to Nigeria, where people are literally sifting through these mountains of electronic waste just to, like, salvage whatever valuable materials they can find.
Yeah, it's a crazy image.
It's a very stark picture of, like, what we're doing with all of our e-waste, We just discard tons and tons of electronics every year.
Every year.
And then so much of it ends up in developing countries where people are literally risking their health. Being exposed to all these toxic materials, just trying to scrape by.
And it's not just Nigeria. This is happening all over the world.
Right. It's a global problem.
Yeah.
And so even our good intentions, like even if we recycle our electronics, it's still part of this problem.
Yeah, recycling is great, but, a lot of times it's very energy intensive.
Right.
And some materials just can't be recycled indefinitely.
Yeah, it makes you think about how much stuff we buy and how much stuff we just throw away.
Yeah.
It's like this whole out of sight, out of mind mentality, which made me think about something else that Beiser argues in the book that's really important.
Yeah.
And that's that, like, reducing our reliance on cars
Yes.
is a key part of this.
Uh-huh.
And we all know that cars contribute to climate change,
Yeah.
but they also use a ton of these power metals that we've been talking about.
Right. Think about how many cars there are on the road.
It's mind-boggling.
It is. And each electric vehicle needs a huge battery pack.
Right.
I mean, the scale of this is just enormous.
But there are cities that are starting to do some really interesting stuff to encourage people to get rid of their cars.
Yes, there are.
Can you talk a little bit about that? What are some of the things that they're doing?
Yeah, well, some cities are investing a lot in public transportation.
Yeah.
Making it cheaper and more convenient.
Like better buses and trains.
Yeah, exactly. And others are building dedicated bike lanes and creating pedestrian zones.
Yeah.
So it's easier and safer to get around without a car.
Mhm.
And there are even some cities that are experimenting with car-free days where they close off whole sections of the city to cars.
Oh, wow.
So it's like giving the city back to the people.
I love that idea. But what about places where cars are just like part of the culture? I mean, I can't imagine giving up my car.
I get that it's a huge change, but think about it this way.
Okay.
What if your commute was faster and less stressful if you took the train or the bus?
Okay.
What if you could bike to work and get some exercise? What if you could just walk to the store instead of having to circle the block for parking?
I'm starting to see your point. I mean, less traffic and cheaper transportation. Who wouldn't want that? But it's not just about me, like what I want to do. It's about bigger changes, right?
Yeah, you're right. We need our governments and city planners to actually prioritize these sustainable transportation options.
So it's not just on individuals.
Right. It has to be a systemic thing.
So what would that look like?
Well, instead of building more highways, we could be investing in high-speed rail or expanding our bus routes or creating safe and efficient bike paths.
And that would mean that we would need fewer of these power metals, right?
Exactly, because if fewer people are driving, then there's less demand for cars and less pressure to mine all these resources.
So it all comes back to our consumption habits.
Yes, it really does. I mean, it's not just about finding new places to mine or coming up with better ways to recycle.
Right.
We have to rethink how much we consume in the first place.
Like a whole new way of thinking about how we design our cities, our transportation systems, even our lifestyle.
Exactly, a fundamental shift in how we live.
And it makes me think about the role of technology in all of this.
Yeah.
Because Beiser talks about how Bill Gates is investing in this entrepreneur who's using AI to find new deposits of metals in the Arctic.
Yeah, that's a really fascinating example.
So is AI the answer? Can technology save us from all of this?
I mean, AI and all these other new technologies have the potential to make mining more efficient and less damaging. But it's important to remember that technology is just a tool.
Right, so it's not a magic bullet.
It's not, we can't just rely on technology to fix the problems we've created.
We have to change our behavior.
We have to address the root cause, which is that we want more and more and more.
Yeah, our demand for stuff is just insatiable.
It is. And so that brings us back to each of us. What can we do individually to make a difference?
Yeah, what can our listeners do?
Well, I think a good first step is just becoming more aware now that you know about the hidden costs of all the things you use every day. You can start making more informed choices.
So it starts with awareness?
It does.
And then what? What kinds of choices are we talking about?
Well, it could be big things like reconsidering how you get around,
Right.
or smaller things like being more mindful about the electronics you buy and how you dispose of them.
Okay, so it's about being more conscious about our choices.
Yeah, making decisions that align with your values and contribute to a more sustainable future.
And I think a lot of people feel like their individual actions don't really matter, but
I even do.
what do you say to that?
I say collective action is powerful.
So we need to work together.
We do. The more people demand change, the more likely it is to happen.
So true. But we'll get into more of those specific actions that people can take in the next part of our deep dive.
Ooh, well,
For now, we're going to take a quick break and we'll be right back.
sounds good.
All right, so we're back, and I think this is the part that a lot of people are probably wondering about.
Yeah.
Like, what can we actually do about this whole power metal situation?
Yeah, it can feel overwhelming,
Totally. I mean, it's a huge global system, right?
Right. It's easy to feel like your individual actions don't really matter.
Yeah, like I'm just one person.
But they do add up.
Okay, so where do we even begin?
Well, I mean, we were just talking about a lot of it, transportation,
Yeah.
our consumption habits, even just being more aware of where the things we use come from. Those are all areas where we can make choices.
Okay, so let's start with transportation then.
Okay.
What are some things that people could do differently?
Well, if you live in a city, maybe you could look into public transit options you haven't tried before.
Okay.
A lot of cities are investing in things like light rail bus, rapid transit systems, stuff that can actually be faster and easier than driving.
Mm-hmm.
And even if you're not ready to ditch your car completely, maybe commit to 1 or 2 car-free days a week.
Oh, I like that. Like start small.
Yeah.
Build
Yep.
up to it.
Exactly.
And it actually reminds me of something I read in one of the reviews of this book.
Oh, yeah.
The reviewer mentioned how they almost got hit by cars twice in one day just walking around their neighborhood.
Oh, wow.
And it made me think about how our infrastructure is just not designed for people who aren't in cars.
It's so true. Our cities are built for cars.
Yeah, and it almost forces us to drive.
Exactly. It's not always an individual choice.
So we need better bike lanes, safer sidewalks,
Yes.
more frequent buses and trains,
All of that.
things that make it actually appealing and feasible to not drive.
Right.
So it's not just about changing our own habits, it's about advocating for those bigger changes too, right?
Absolutely. Let your city council know that this is something you care about.
Yeah, right to them.
Go to community meetings, join advocacy groups.
All that stuff, all of that stuff.
Because it matters.
It does.
And even if you don't live in a city,
Right.
there are still things you can do right.
Oh, yeah, for sure. I mean, even in more rural areas, there's often opportunities for carpooling or ride sharing.
Okay.
And if you do need to drive, think about fuel efficiency, Maybe it's time to trade in that gas guzzler for something that gets better mileage.
Yeah, like a hybrid or an electric vehicle.
Exactly.
But okay, transportation is one thing.
Yeah.
But what about just reducing our consumption in general?
Well, that's a big one, right?
It is. It's a huge one. Because we live in this culture where we just buy new things constantly.
Yeah, like the latest gadget, the newest whatever.
And upgrade, upgrade, upgrade.
But do we really need all that stuff?
That's the question, right?
Yeah.
Do we really need the newest smartphone every year? Do we need a new TV when the old one still works?
It's hard, though, because there's so much pressure to keep up with the Joneses.
There is. We're constantly bombarded with advertising telling us that we need all this stuff to be happy.
Yeah, you need this, you need that, you need this.
And it's tough to resist.
It is. So how do we do it?
Well, I think a good place to start is just becoming more aware of our purchases.
Okay.
Like before you buy something, ask yourself, do I really need this? Where did this come from? What was the impact of making this thing?
Yeah, those are good questions to ask.
They are.
And I think that leads to other changes, too.
Right.
Like maybe you decide to repair something instead of replacing it.
Yeah.
Or buy something used instead of new.
Exactly. There's so many ways to reduce our consumption without really sacrificing our quality of life.
And there's this idea that being sustainable has to be, like, expensive and inconvenient.
Right.
But that's not true, right?
No, not at all.
Yeah.
I mean, a lot of times it can actually save you money in the long run.
Oh, yeah, for sure.
Like cooking at home instead of eating out, finding creative ways to reuse things you already have.
Yeah.
It can actually be fun.
Yeah, and empowering.
Totally.
So it's like a challenge to get creative.
Exactly.
Speaking of resourceful,
Yeah.
we were talking earlier about e-waste
Mm-hmm.
and how recycling isn't always the answer.
Right. It's not a perfect solution.
So what else can we do about that?
Well, I think one of the most important things is just trying to extend the lifespan of our electronics.
Okay.
Like make sure you're updating the software, keeping things clean and in good repair.
Right. Basic maintenance.
Exactly.
Yeah.
That can make a huge difference.
Okay.
And when it is time to upgrade, maybe consider selling your old device or donating it instead of throwing it away.
Okay, so give it a second life.
Exactly.
And what about when things break?
Yeah,
Is it better to try to repair them or just buy new?
that's a good question. It really depends on what it is and how badly it's broken.
Okay.
But there are a lot of local repair shops or online resources that can help you figure out how to fix things
Yeah.
or find affordable parts.
Mm-hmm.
So it's worth looking into those options before you just assume something is trash.
Yeah, there's a whole like DIY element to it
There is.
that I think is kind of cool.
Yeah, it's empowering.
Like you're taking control of your stuff
Exactly.
instead of just being at the mercy of, companies that want you to buy new things all the time.
Right. Planned obsolescence.
Exactly.
So yeah, learning to fix things yourself can be really satisfying.
And it makes you appreciate the value of things more.
Absolutely.
But okay, beyond all these individual actions, we were also talking about the need for like systemic change.
Right. Bigger picture stuff.
What does that look like?
Well, for one thing, we need stricter regulations on mining, both here in the U.S. and internationally.
So holding companies accountable.
Yeah. Make them take responsibility for the environmental and social impacts of their operations.
So we need to put pressure on our elected officials to pass those laws?
Exactly. Vote for people who prioritize environmental protection and responsible sourcing.
And support organizations that are fighting for these things.
Yes, absolutely. Use your voice. Use your vote.
Yeah.
Support the groups that are pushing for change.
Because those bigger changes can then make it easier for individuals to make better choices too.
Yeah, exactly. It's like creating a system that supports sustainability instead of making it an uphill battle.
So it's not just about individual willpower, it's about having the right infrastructure in place.
Right. I mean, think about it. If your city has a great public transportation system, you're way more likely to use it.
Makes sense.
If there are incentives for buying an electric car, you're more likely to do it.
So we need both individual action and systemic change.
We do. It all works together.
And that's where the real hope lies, right?
I think, so it's not about individuals trying to be perfect. It's about creating a world where sustainability is just the norm.
Yeah, the default option.
Exactly. And that's something we can all work towards.
Man, it feels like we've gone everywhere in this deep dive, from the bottom of the ocean to like mountains of trash.
Oh, it's a big topic.
It is, and it's so complicated.
It is.
Yeah.
But I think that's why it's so important to talk about it.
Yeah.
We can't just focus on all the cool new tech without understanding where it comes from and how it's made.
Yeah, and that's what I liked about Beiser's book. It really connects the dots for you.
Yeah.
Like, it shows you how our everyday choices, even the phones we use, the way we get around, it's all tied into this global race for resources.
And it really underscores that, technology alone isn't going to solve these problems.
Right.
We have to change how we think, how much we consume, and ultimately the systems we've created.
So we need like a total paradigm shift.
We do.
But where does that even begin?
I think it starts with each of us recognizing that we actually have power, It's easy to feel overwhelmed by all of this, but our choices do matter.
So what's like one thing people can do, after listening to this?
That's a good question. I'd say take a look at your own tech habits. What devices do you use every day? Where did they come from? Are there ways you could use them less or make them last longer?
Okay.
Maybe it's spending less time on your phone or fixing a broken laptop instead of buying a new one, or just thinking more carefully about what you buy and how you get rid of it when you're done.
So it's about being more intentional with our technology.
Yeah, exactly.
And maybe that leads to other changes too.
Right. Maybe you start looking into companies that make their products ethically, or you find out about e-waste recycling programs in your community. The more you learn, the more you can do.
It's like a ripple effect.
Is one small change can lead to bigger changes.
And those ripples can turn into waves.
Exactly. And that's what collective action is all about. We don't have to do this alone.
There's power in numbers.
There is so many people and organizations are working towards a better future, and we can all be a part of that.
And that's a really hopeful message. It's not about feeling bad or overwhelmed. It's about recognizing that we can make a difference.
Yeah.
Both through the choices we make and by working together to create a more just and sustainable world.
Well said.
So to wrap things up, I want to leave everyone with this thought. The future isn't something that just happens to us. It's something we create together, through the choices we make every day.
Yeah.
So let's choose wisely. Let's choose a future where technology helps us and helps the planet, not the other way around.
Couldn't agree more.
Thanks for joining us, everyone. Until next time, keep learning, keep questioning, and keep making a difference.